Okay, thank you very much. So I think we can start the class now. Good morning, everyone, and then um, let me say happy Democracy Day. I apologize that I have to borrow the period for your holiday. I hope it's not very bad. Please just confirm for the last time if you are hearing me, and if it's possible that the person. Okay, thank you. If it's possible that the person with background noise should please unmute himself so that we won't get disturbed. So we'll continue about the research design. The other time we actually made a kind of preparation towards the actual research design. And when we mention things that are expected in a research, and then the objectives remains the same, that we're going to be talking about research overview, most of the things that we did in the last class. Then we talk about the significance of research design, and then what research design itself is. And so by the end of this class, it's expected that each and every one of us should be able to talk about what research design is, and then how we can adopt it or apply it um, in any of our research. Okay, we've mentioned all this about what research is, and then we definitely stop about um, the overview of research process. I mean, we mentioned this. I just want to capture this so that we remember where we stopped. That before we can actually have a research focus, there will have been an observation, and then we might have been able to go through some literature review. And so today we deal deeper. I put this one in the PowerPoint I gave out, and then we ended up by talking about the plans, general plan, talking about quantitative research and qualitative research, and then we talk also about the three C's. Um, C for completeness, C for clarity, and the C for credibility. And that's just it. So bringing up from what we have learned so far, we still want to talk about what research design is. In our previous class, we said research design refers to the framework that guides our research, and that framework should ensure that there is a structured inquiry and there are valid results. And so today, I'm actually adding it again to define the research design as a set of decisions that make up the master plan of our research. Specifying the methods and procedures for collecting and analyzing the needed information to accomplish a specific research. And so that shows that if you are able to come up with a design, and you can give me your design, if I implement that design, we should be able to arrive at close answers, if not going to be the same answer. I'm going to say not generally same answer because we expect that social sciences, human behavior could actually change with so many factors. But for this, the purpose of this class, we want to refer to research design as a framework of research. And that framework should ensure structured inquiry and valid results. And alternatively, you can still have it as a set of advanced decision, because research design has to be planned, you know, in advance. It's not when you get to the field that you will start talking about the research. So research decisions that are planned in advance, and then this one make us the master plan of our research, and it's going to specify the methods, the procedure for collecting and analyzing data for a particular research. I think we are clear with what we need to talk about in research design now. So it's possible that someone asks about what research design is. Number one, it's a factor that we have to understand that it's an advanced decision that is made. And so that is why when you have your methodology, the first thing you're going to write is research design. You're going to tell us the type of research design you are planning, and maybe that one will help us, will guide us to be able to understand what you're going to do. The question is, why do we need to have a research design? Because we need something that will facilitate a smooth sailing of all our research operations. You see, we don't want to get to the field and find out that the money, that the effort we are going to put into this research is actually more than it can take within 4 years. We don't want to go to the field and discover that we don't even have money to accomplish this research. And that is the purpose of a research design. We have to plan such that we have smooth sailing of various research operations, and then our research will be efficient as possible, yielding maximal information with minimal input of effort, time, and money. So obviously it is important that we have a research design, and these are the questions that a good research design must be able to answer. So if you have a research design, and maybe you give your fellow that research design to evaluate, that fellow must be able to tell us what the study is about, and why is the study being made, and where will the study be carried out in terms of location, and what type of data will be required. What can the required data, or where can the required data be found? What period of time will the study include? What will be the sample design? How will you obtain the sample? And what techniques of data collection will you use or will be used? How will the data be analyzed, and in what style will the report be prepared? These are things that should be handled by an adequate research design. And so, coming back to our experience at master's level, if someone says 20 key informants will be interviewed, or maybe 20 copies of questionnaire will be administered, the question is why, how? So if I have to ask a question, why will you do this, how will you do this, that shows that your research design is not complete. Please, can you mute yourself, please? Thank you. And then what are the expected parts of a research design? Number one, we are expected to have a research design that will actually talk about four components. The sampling design. The sampling design will deal with the method of selection of items to be observed for the study. The observational design, and then this one will relate to conditions under which certain observations have to be made. Then we need issued about statistical design, and then statistical design will give us the form of statistics that we are expected to use in our research. And then we need operational design. How would these things that we have written be operationalized? If you don't have these four major parts, sampling design, observational design, statistical design, and operational design, then that shows that our research design is incomplete. And if these four parts are not clear enough, if you are required to come and explain something, then you have disobeyed the rule of clarity. And that is actually what we try to look at. And so we talk about those C's, those factors, I mean 3 C's: completeness, clarity, and the third one, what was that? I mean that third one has to really be brought into credibility, has to be brought into saying. So for now, we are saying that your research design should have four components: the sampling design, the observational design, statistical design, and then the operational design. And so if you have that, the question is this: what are those things that we should consider when you want to really choose a research design? Number one, we should have clear understanding of the means of obtaining information. Where will your information, where will your data come from? If you don't have sufficient information about where you're going to collect your data from, then you are not likely going to have a satisfactory research design. Then the availability, your availability and your skills. You see, let me give example of people that want to use social survey as an example. If you are working in some areas, some will say they don't accept you to use paper survey. I mean, you don't use paper questionnaire. And some will say you can use this I mean, is it OTK, this data collect information. We use this there's this kind of support system that that disallows you from using paper survey method, that allows you to use maybe your computer, your phone, and you'll be able to track online, and then you track in real time. So what skill do you have? The people that are going to help you, what skill do they have? And so whatever your design has to be within the skill that is available to you. Then what is the objective of the problem? The nature of your problem, the nature of your research, the objective of your research will dictate how you're going to design your research. What kind of research design will you use? So I've talked about the nature of the problem, then the availability of time and money for the research work. These are very important for you to think about before you come up with your research design. And again, I said, why is research design important? Here I said the first rule of a good research is that should be a good research design. And we've mentioned it before now, that research design is blueprint of your research. So if you have a valid blueprint, a blueprint that is complete, a blueprint that is credible, a blueprint that is clear, then we're going to have a good research uh, design. And so before we go further to try to understand the different research designs that we have, I want to see if you have questions about the different types of factors, different factors that we have to consider when talking about research design. So let me listen to your question, maybe one or two questions, and we'll continue, please. Hello. Thank. Oh, okay. Unfortunately, it's moving from my own side here. I don't know. Maybe that would be network problem. Do we have? Let's see from others. Is it moving for others? It's not moving from your area. Okay, let me check. Oh, okay. Are we still on the same area? What? Oh, okay. Oh, okay. You can now say, maybe I think the problem is that I was actually having a full something. Okay, let's go ahead, please. Is it moving now, right? Okay, thank you very much. Yeah. Okay, okay. So I'll use this one. So now let's listen to question if there are questions, please. Okay, that shows we are clear about factors that we have to consider when we are choosing our research design. Do I make that assumption, please? Okay, and I want to, okay, thank you. And I want to make an assumption that we have to think, we have understood that research design is actually the blueprint of a research. It's a set of decisions that we have to make before commencing the research, and then this one brings into consideration our availability, our skills, and our pockets in terms of how much we have. And so we can continue. Generally speaking, we have three types of research designs, and then we group them into exploratory research design, descriptive research design, and causal research design. So research is generally are observed in these three methods. Sorry, I'm just watching. Sorry, I just want to pick something. Okay, now we start from exploratory research. We actually see exploratory research as a kind of outset of a research. You want to conduct a research. You don't have any information, you don't have much information about the problem you want to explore. It's assumed that maybe there is a culture for people in humanities, maybe there is a culture, there is a practice that you really want to see how they do it. I mean, people from sociology will consider, will consider lots of exploratory research. People from social geography, human geography, might want to consider exploratory research. In this type of research, it is understood that you don't know much about the problem. You want a situation where we can interact with the people, with the owner of the problem, before we know much about the problem. And that is what exploratory research is all about. And then, how do we use exploratory research? Number one, we need to gain background information about the research of our interest. We need to be able to define the terms. That shows that there are some terminologies we might not be used to. And then we'd be able to clarify some problems and again possibly form some hypotheses. Sorry, we have some underground, we have some background noise, please. We still have some people hasn't been able to, please can you, let me see. I want to see if I can call the name of where the noise is coming from. Please, can you just unmute yourself? Can you just mute yourself, please? Just mute yourself. Thank you. So, hey, somebody is banging on that ground and is disturbing us, please. Yeah, I can. You're not even stopping. Mr. Ibe Egu, please can you mute yourself, please, sir? Okay, thank you so much. Then Mr. Gideon Adegbaju, please mute yourself. Mr. Gideon Adegbaju, thank you so much. Yeah. Thank you. So let's continue. Thank you so much. I was talking about exploratory research design. I said before you use exploratory research design, it is assumed that you don't know much about that problem. As I said, that people in sociology, human geography, I don't know if it's applicable very well to political science. I don't know. I don't think so. People talking about cultural heritage, cultural issues, you can actually adopt exploratory research. Anthropology, it's very important for them. You don't know, you don't have much information about something and you want to know. So there will be some clear terminologies that you might not have been used to. And these are kind of things we really pick up. And then there are two ways by which we can adopt exploratory research. So anyone adopting exploratory research is likely going to use two of these methods. Number one, you're either going to use secondary data. That is when you focus basically on interpreting existing information. And this is basically going to be maybe like desktop research or maybe a kind of review work. You just explore. So you can actually have exploratory review. Otherwise, for PhD, well, it's expected to go to the field and you can actually make use of the terminology or the methodology we refer to as experience survey. In this case, you go to the field to meet people that are knowledgeable about the issue that you are interested in, the problem of interest. And in this case, now you make use of key informant interview technique, and then you make use of lead user survey, A lead user survey where you have maybe you have something you want to come up. For example, let's look at how some people use certain technology. You don't know how they use it, but again you want to get on to see how they use it, and in that case you make use of lead user survey, or maybe a kind of methodology. You can make use of case study analysis, and you can actually make use of focus groups. These are methodology that can be attributed to the use of exploratory research design. So if you are using exploratory research design, like I said, you either make use of secondary sources, or you make use of experience survey, where you make use of key informant interview technique, the lead user survey, case analysis, and a focus group discussion. That is going for exploratory research method. So, like I said, people in social geography or human geography, people in anthropology, or somehow sociology, because it deals with culture, or anyone working on cultural issues. Maybe you want to talk about deity, certain orisha, the practice in some areas. It is actually good for you to use exploratory research. And then when you use exploratory research, you do more of qualitative reportage rather than quantitative reportage when you are pulling your results out. So you do more of maybe quality, maybe talking in terms of um, um, content analysis and some other issues, some other methods. And then if you are going into the digital type, I think people in this area make use of Atlas AI, and then we have lots of something supporting issue. But what I'm saying necessary is that exploratory research design is often seen as a qualitative research design, often qualitative. So the other type that we have is descriptive research. Descriptive research is suitable for anyone conducting a research where questions who, what, where, when, and how are being asked. This is more generic than the exploratory research, and this one can actually make use of either qualitative or quantitative research approach. And then in this case, it's also desirable if you are studying a large population, and then you can't, maybe because you don't have enough pocket, or you don't have enough time, and then all you just do is to pick a sample population, and which I think many of us do. Or then you say you are doing a descriptive research. But descriptive research can actually be seen in two ways. Either we have cross-sectional studies or longitudinal studies. So I said, descriptive research will ask the question about who is doing something, what, when, how. So that shows that most of the things we do are basically descriptive research. And then research can actually be described or seen in two perspectives, either as cross-sectional research or longitudinal research. If it is cross-sectional research, we are focusing on a sample of population at one point in time. Just like saying you are having a snapshot of a particular situation. For example, somebody wants to study the schools, the universities in Nigeria, and then you take a snapshot of Obafemi University, a kind of case study analysis of Obafemi University. If you're doing that, or then you said you're going to come up with at a particular time, you pick it at a particular time, you compare it with another one, you have a kind of cross-sectional study. You do what I mean is that you focus on a sample population, and then again you have put them into different maybe theme, into different kind of positions. So you can have about 2 or 3 cross sections at different stage that you think will be representation of whatever you're going to do. And again, we said representativeness is very important for cross-sectional study. So if you are conducting a cross-sectional study, we should also consider how representative are your samples are. So let's say, assume that you want to study the universities in Nigeria and we are picking Obafemi University. How representative would that be? Should we go 100 level, 200 level, 300 level, 400 level, so that we will not be having a kind of lopsided information? And then maybe somebody is actually getting a field work, as we will talk about later, getting a field work. How representative is that? So for descriptive research study, there is need for us to consider representativeness. And don't forget, this third point is very important, that when you're talking about cross-sectional study, you must also understand that whatever you do is actually considered within a particular margin of error. And that is why this kind of research can be quantitative. And then maybe in your analysis will say, okay, you're going to have it into 95%. You have your result into to be valid at 95% confidence level, and then which means that you are eligible to make 5 errors out of 100 trials in that area. But again, cross-sectional study is a form of descriptive study, but in this case we have to think about representativeness, and that is just the thing. For longitudinal studies, in this case we have repeated measurement of the same sample. We have repeated measurements. Maybe you study Obafemi University across board at a particular time, then you do it again. So you can actually do it for different times. So here we said it involves multiple measurements over time. So rather than the snapshot that we call the cross-sectional, cross-sectional studies now, we call this one the movie of population, because it's kind of something you can stream, something that work over time. So you can actually have, like I said, you can have a cross-sectional form of descriptive research, and you can have the longitudinal form of um, descriptive research. While one deals with different stages at a particular time and having the concern of representativeness, the other one also talks about representativeness, but again, more importantly, talks about taking data, taking record over time of a particular setup. So we have different areas, but in terms of methods now, we said based on the nature now, you say we can have what we refer to as continuous panels, or we have discontinuous panels. When you're talking about continuous panel as a method of descriptive research studies, and then here you're talking about asking the same question from same respondent of, in a particular panel. For example, now you can decide to say, okay, let's look for part 1 student. We ask same question from part 1 student. We ask the same question for part 2 student. We ask the same question for part 3 student. And then we can give example. Let me give example of one of things we did some time ago. I think I mentioned that in the last class. We ask a question from some people. We came back to ask the same question from the same people. If they are telling the truth, you are likely going to have similar results. If you are not telling the truth, you are likely going to have different results. But when I talk about truth now, truth is subjective of the socioeconomic status of the people, the period at which the interview take place, and then maybe the configuration, the mood of the people at that particular time. You see, there are different areas where you can adopt this. For example, people from geography that are working on a perception of people to different weather at a particular time, they are likely going to have the same results if the weather has not changed, or if their body configuration has not changed. Imagine you asking a same question from someone who had massive clothes on during maybe Hamatan, and now has removed or doesn't have massive clothes on? And so that shows that in a situation we can actually come to ask a question maybe in a month, within a particular month, maybe in a month's time, or after some time, you come back again to ask the same question. This is actually what happens when you're talking about this kind of continuous panel. Asking the same question from the same respondents, not necessarily at the same time, not necessarily as close by time. You can actually start and again see what you end up with. So here we just give example of people that change position. Okay, this one was actually given an example of what happens about consumption pattern. Having this kind of brand switching brand switching pattern. When you talk about studies that want to define how consumers switch brand, or maybe you want to see measure kind of what affects somebody's perception or somebody's pattern of doing things. So in this case we have what we refer to as continuous panels, and then the other time we have discontinuous panels. So in this case now, where you match two different panels, two different informants. I think this one is the example that I gave the other time, where we ask questions from the key informant interview, and we went ahead to ask the same question from the community. In that case, we actually have this continuous panel. These are different people, and again we are asking the same information because we need information. We need to elaborate more on the answer we have gotten, and that's actually why this one is important. And so that is all about um, descriptive research. So I've mentioned descriptive research, and I've mentioned research design, and I've mentioned exploratory research design. So I want to ask if there are questions before we continue to another type of research design. Do we have questions, please? Please, you can unmute yourself to talk. Do we have good morning, sir? Do we have questions? Good morning, sir. Okay, sir. Thank you, sir. Yes, sir. Thank you, sir. It's possible you use both. Either it depends on your data now. You use either qualitative research reporting or quantitative research reporting, or you use mixed methods. Yes, it is possible. Thank you, sir. Yes, sir. Do we have one? Let's take one more question before we continue. Okay, and thank you, Mr. Olajedino. I think that also reminds us that qualitative and quantitative data sets or a method of analysis we go for descriptive research, while exploratory research is often basically dependent on qualitative research or qualitative research methods. So that is actually how it goes on. So let's go to the third type. Thank you. The third type of research of research design is causal research design. In this case we're talking about causality, when we have two variables or two or more variables. We have an x, a dependent variable, and we have an independent variable, and we have a dependent variable. I repeat, is there any problem, sir? Are you okay? Hello, please, can you hear me? Hello. Okay, thank you so much. Thank you so much. I said thank you. For causality, we talk about two things. Something, thank you, sir. Something causes the other one. Thank you. In this case, we are talking about different variables. And so we have X, we have Y. People in geography, I think virtually everybody can actually go with causal research design, depending on factors. Something affects something, effect of something, something impacts something. And so in this case now we have an independent variable and we have dependent variable. But we have to understand that anytime you talk about causal research design, we think about experiments. We think about experiments. So experiments is often the main method to actually think about causal research design. And when we're talking about experiment, I define experiment here as manipulating an independent variable to see how it affects a dependent variable while also controlling the effects of additional extraneous variables. So three variables now. We have the origin, we have the expected end, and then we have the factor that affects them. So this is anytime you're going to have experiments, you might be thinking more about causal research design. And so the question is, what are the different types of experiments we have? We have field experiments. I think people in geography, social sciences generally, we might depend on, you might want to talk about field experiment, depend, but geography, maybe sciences too, physical sciences, will be thinking more about field experiments. In this case, you go out, often outdoor, often in natural setting, you can have a field experiment. And then in that case, when you are working on field experiment, it is most important, it is most likely that you want to make use of a causal research design. And then you can have laboratory experiment. You see, the context of laboratory might differ. For psychologists, laboratory will be that room where you are, where you can see people behaving and then they can't see you, where you can monitor people's behavior at a particular time. For people in maybe physical science, your laboratory might be um, your laboratory might be maybe whatever, maybe a cloned area, or maybe a screen house. You can do whatever you want to do in a screen house. For any laboratory, you only set up the environment. It is not a natural environment. So once it's not a natural environment, then it's a laboratory experiment. If you are experimenting in natural environment, then we might actually say you're working on the natural environment. Then we have many people from political science. From political science, we say you do more of quasi-experimental design. In this case, because, and we have some areas, sociology too, you might also want to do quasi-experimental design. In this case, you are not setting up an experiment in the real sense, because um, you cannot change. For the other experiments, you might have to manipulate one to see, okay, when it is 20 meter, this is what we have. When it is 40, this is what we have. And again, for laboratory experiments, including for psychology people, you might actually look at a situation. Okay, when I introduce something to this environment, this is how this person behaves. When I insult him, he just packed out, maybe dealing with anger management and some other things. So what makes him angry? If I say this, he gets angry. If I say this, okay, he cools down. Let's see how we can actually pick up something. And I think people in psychology, people dealing with mental health, you have lots of things, those ones to do. And then for the screen house experiment, you add water. How much water did you add at a particular time? You have a certain growth, and then you have the situation. Then you also could have this experiment, having people within different social system. And this is interestingly what we have as the one we call the experimental design. In this case, you can't manipulate who get a particular treatment or who does not get a particular treatment. So in that case, it's actually difficult to actually think about why people behave in a particular way. So why people behave in a particular way actually have lots of information again to go by it. So I said, when you can manipulate, rather you must observe what the nature presents to you. And again, we still have to think when you are presenting this, if you are working on this kind of data, the data you derive, you might use qualitative method. But if you decide to use quantitative method, then you have to think about a statistically reliable period. Let me give this example. If somebody working on physical geography or working on field experiment is using 95% confidence interval, you that are in humanities, social science, because you are dealing with humans, it is expected or it is still approved if you work with 90% confidence interval, meaning that you are able to make what is, I'm going to put in inverted comma now, what we refer to as assumption that you are wrong 10 times out of 100. For people in science, people working on field experiment, you are not always allowed to go beyond, to go lesser than 95% confidence interval. And that shows that your P must be significant at, at less than or equal to 0.5. But for people working in health, things that can cause people to die if there's any mistake made, then you might go for 99% confidence interval, meaning that your P might be equal to 0.01. Because if one person dies out of 100, then there is a problem. So you really don't want anybody to die. But for people in geography, if you make an error of 5 out of 100, you are still okay. And for people in humanities, people in political science, sociology, if there is for any need you are using quantitative research method, you still go up to 90% confidence interval. That shows that if you make on, I won't say it's error now, I will say on unpopular choice. If you make an unpopular choice 10 times out of 100, then you are still in the right path. So I'm saying this so that we don't see your research. Somebody in sociology, you don't start saying 99% confidence interval or 95% it's not compulsory you have that, and then you are not, in fact, anybody in social sciences, at least you are allowed to make up to 95% confidence interval if you are using quantitative data. And if you are using qualitative data, you are allowed to choose up to 90% confidence interval. So you are not bound by any rules to choose 99% confidence interval or to report it. But people in health sciences might have to report it because it involves human life. So, but what I'm saying in essence is that we have three types of experimental design, or what I would say research, causal research generally, or causal research designs, or which can be implemented using experimental design. We're talking about feed. It can be based on feed. It can be based on laboratory. It can be based on quasi environmental, experimental designs. And I also want to mention this, that when I talk about laboratory, I do not mean that laboratory in BOC alone. Every psychology has a laboratory, sociology could have a laboratory, geography have different types of laboratories, political science will have their own laboratory, people in history. Hello, can you hear me? Hello? Hello? I can hear you, but I don't know if you can hear me. Hello? Am I still audible? Okay. Thank you so much. Yeah. Oh, you cannot hear anything since. Can you check your? I think it should be from you. Please check your online listing, your internet. The lecture is on. Please, if you can't hear me, there's somebody is advising that you leave and rejoin. Yeah. Thank you. I'm actually trying to record. Yes. Thank you. And don't forget I said we have experimental design to include field experiment, laboratory experiment, and quasi experimental design. But in any of these experimental design, as I mentioned this one earlier, we have independent variables, we have dependent variables, and we have what we refer to as external variables. The independent variables are actually generally um, regarded as those variables that you have the independent variable. Yes, maybe you have control on them and then you want to manipulate them. In most cases, this is actually um, the one that you want to decide, the one you want to decide, the one that you think there is an effect on. And so the dependent variable depends on the independent variable. So we are interested in changing it, but for now we can't change it because the change is actually depends on the independent variable. Let me give an instance now for some of us, maybe in geography. We're talking about rainfall, and then we're talking about crop yield. Rainfall, rainfall will not depend on crop yield. Um, Crop yield will depend on rainfall. And so rainfall in this case is an independent variable. Sorry, somebody is complaining. I hope we are okay. Okay, we have rainfall, we have crop yield. But again, you're going to understand that crop yield does not necessarily always depend on rainfall. And so we have some external variable like what's your input like? How did you prepare the farm? What is the weather? What is the characteristics of maybe the temperature and some other thing? And then other things that will affect what you're going to have at the end. And so that is just the whole thing. And then sorry, I just want to confirm something. Mr. Igu, Mr. Ibe, Ego, please can you unmute yourself? I mean, can you mute yourself, please? Mute yourself, Mr. Ibe. Thank you. So thank you, sir. Thank you. So I've mentioned when you're trying to study a kind of causal relationship between hello, but can other people hear? Hello, sir. Maybe you should rejoin. I think the net should be from your network. Thank you. So generally speaking, I talked about when you are working on anything that has to do with causality, something affecting another one. We have many variables. It can be a kind of multiple variable. It can be maybe binary variable. Something is affecting the other, and that is why we say we might actually want to use experimental design. For many people using experimental design, it is most likely that you use quantitative techniques, because you're going to be having some digits. Your data are likely going to be in scalar format. You are going to assign something to your observation. You might have true data, you might have untrue data. For example, what I mean by untrue data, those are things you do in coding. If you have 1 and you have 0, one can be your male, 0 can be female, or either of the two, or maybe 1 becomes man or male and then 2 becomes female. That does not necessarily mean that that 2 it's actually for male or for female. It's just a kind of coding. You are assigning values to what what does not carry value at that particular time. So you have to understand the nature of the scale that you are using. In that case, now we talked more about nominal scale. When a male does not rank higher than than female, you don't have to put weight to all of them. These are things we actually have to get careful with. But don't forget, here we're talking basically on experimental design. We're talking about causal relationship. We're talking about areas research that involve you being, getting, observing some things, or maybe getting values of observation or records of observation. And so, when you're talking about experimental design, number one, we have a setting for your experiment, and that setting for that experiment must accommodate your dependent variable and then your independent variable. And like I mentioned the other time, the dependent variable may be attributed solely to change in the independent variable. That is one. Or may be attributed to other factors. And so somehow you can have one independent variable or one dependent variable, and you can have more dependent variable or more independent variable. The example I gave the other time, relationship between rainfall and crop yield. Now, if you are an undergraduate student, that's a perfect study. But for postgraduate students, it's not a good topic, because it is not only rainfall that constitutes the weather, and there are going to be lots of intercursory variables, and you might have more than one variables. So rather than saying rainfall now, for postgraduate students we might say, okay, talk about climate now on crop yield, to make us to understand that we can actually have singular item for either dependent or independent variable, or we have multiple items, and these ones are going to influence the way we analyze the data. So these are the common symbols that we use when we are using experimental design. There's need for observation. It's a measurement, the one we have symbol O for a dependent variable. And then we have X now to show change or manipulated value of an independent variable. And then we have our random assignment of subjects to experimental and control groups. You randomly assign, you just assign to ask the question, what if, and then we have what we refer to as experimental effect. What has happened when there is a change in one before we get to the other one. So as we are mentioning issues about experimental design now, I think we should be thinking of what statistical analysis can we use, and that's actually things we have. But before going to think about that, we also could have pre-test and post-test. This is more important for people from Faculty of Education. I think they do lots of pre-test and post-test. Post-test. And pre-test, when you take the measurement prior to the changing in independent variable. And again, post-test is after. Sorry, Hello? Please, can you still hear me? Okay, thank you. Thank you so much. Yeah, thank you. So, yeah, thank you. We have pre-test and post-test. Thank you. And then for some other area, for other, okay, I mean, if you have people from education, I know you do a lot of things. You want to test the cognitive, or you want to test the impact of a particular maybe teaching aid on students or pupils, and then you first test. That is actually the first test is for you to know the background, to have the background information. For people in science or social sciences, maybe that involve field experimentation, what you do mostly, the first thing you do is to have information about the background information. You have background information, you first conduct the test, and then afterwards, after you have done whatever you have done, I mean you want to do, to manipulate, to change, then you have the post test. This is what happens after. And so in this case now, you determine the change in whatever happens. And in another area, you might actually have to talk about, for other people, you might have to talk about control. And based on whether you use control, you can actually put the experimental design into three groups now. We have the true experimental design. If you identify the true independent variable and independent variable, like I said, many people in geography will actually want to associate with this. Then we have quasi experimental design. Quasi experimental design will actually might actually have to go to people in sociology, people in political science, sociology, people in political science. And again, don't forget, we mentioned issue about exploratory research design that actually will, I know that will resonate more with people in anthropology. And then we have before, after, with control group. Also, people that are in the science part of geography will actually have lots to do with this. And there's so much people in education, we actually have lots of things to do. In this case, you're going to have a control group. You either have a control group, that's number one. You've designed something happens to this place, then you have other areas that do not have that are not subjected to the same condition, like the person you, I mean, sorry, the group that you are focusing. And then let's assume, I mean, let me speak something from sociology, and then maybe we want to, or maybe psychology. We actually want to see, we have to observe some reactions from people that were, I mean, that have suffered rape. So maybe you put people that have, because you can't have before and after for those type of, I mean, for that type of experiment, but you can actually have a control group. You can have a control group. This means that it is not every experiment that you're going to have pre and post test for, and it is not every experiment that you should have control group for. But again, it's always very good if you can have a control group for your experiment. Depends on what your experiment is. But for exploratory research generally, or for any exploratory research design, you don't necessarily have to have a control group, because you don't know the problem, you are just getting into the problem. But for causal research, causal relationship, research that shows causality, you need either a control group or to conduct a pre-test or post-test to be able to validate whatever you are working on. And so control group, we say controls, I mean control of extraneous variables, typically achieved by the use of a second group of subjects. And then you have your own experimental group. Those are the ones that are exposed to what you want to do. People in geography, if you're dealing with climate, it is actually very difficult to have a control group or experimental group if you are not doing a laboratory experiment, because we have, every area is subjected to different conditions. For people in sociology, I don't know if it makes sense for you to have a control group. I don't know. because most of your work will actually go towards exploratory, issues. I don't think it makes sense because you can't alter a particular environment. You have to deal with people. But control group is a valid thing to have if you are working with any research in education. If you are testing maybe a way of teaching, a teaching aid or a system, it's actually very good to have. Then if you are working on a feed laboratory, on a laboratory test, if you are doing laboratory tests, it's often very good to have an experimental group and group and a control group. Then some feed experiments also allows for control group, especially people working in hydrology, taking water samples. Yes, you might likely going to think about control um, group. And so that's the situation about experimental group. So then things we have to start thinking about if we are conducting experimental research design is that you need validity. You need validity. Number one, you want to see if the change that you observed in your dependent variable and in a crop yield, for example, is due to weather condition or is due to rainfall, change in rainfall. So then you might have a kind of valid, but don't forget I said there are cases where this is not always so. So we're just going to make some brief statement about how to integrate analysis into this. Then number two, that's your experiment. How does it apply to the real world issue? Outside the experimental setting, how does it apply? For example, people in geography, you might decide to conduct a field test and then you have problem because your field test might really not go with people in other environments. And then I don't think this is a crime for us to do, even if it's psychology and then you work on a laboratory and then you find out that it's actually not saying what others have said. That is why we have a stage or an area in your work we call discussion. In your discussion, you have to compare what has happened and what has not happened somehow. Why do you have what you have? What do people say about it? What rules or what theory goes with whatever you have said? So we call that one in, we have internal validity. The first one, when it talks about whether the observed change has emanated from the change in the independent variable. Then we talk about internal validity, and then the other one we are comparing to the real world, we have external validity. So there are some factors that actually affect this validity, and then well, I talk about internal and external validity. Asking the question, our claims concerning the effects of the treatment valid in this particular experiment, then can our result be generalized to other population outside the setting? And then there are a lot of things we have to think about whether we want to test our validity. Number one, you're thinking about history. Let me give an example. In my own field of specialization, I want to talk about how the chemistry of water has changed over time. And then we want to believe that the story of maybe the story of an origin of a pollutant can actually infer what the conclusion will be. We explain it in our own thing with a particular concept that tells us that the present represents the past. The present represents the past. So if we say, if you have 5 milligram of maybe if you have 5 mm of rainfall, if it yields maybe 20 kilogram of maize, if we have that one, though my example doesn't make sense, but again, if you have something like this, then it's okay. But it's not always. In most cases, or in some many cases, the present does not represent the past. And then for some of us, like my area, that's where we start thinking about what we call hysteresis. My briefest, or maybe my um, close explanation of hysteresis is this: when you have an elastic cable, If you stretch an elastic cable, it doesn't come back to its previous state. That is hysteresis. So that shows that what you see presently might not be representing the history. So you don't assume that whatever you see is because of what has happened. It's actually that understanding is a threat to validity. And that is why you have to be objective in your research, and you don't have to depend on what you think was the answer. And one of those things that might affect that is maturation of some things. Maybe it can take some time, maybe some minutes, some seconds, some years before an independent variable starts acting. For us in geography, we have what we call delayed response, and we have instant response. You see, sometimes some responses might not be instant, and some responses might be delayed. In that case, we have some threats to what we refer to, how valid our experiment is. Then, testing, how many times have you carried out that test? If you carried out a test once, and maybe if you go ahead and you carried out a test once and you report it, we often want to believe that you could have come across that result by chance. That might not be representative, and that is why it is also valid for you to carry out a research over time. You carry out a research over time. You don't just do it once and go. So if you carry out a research twice, it's okay. If it's thrice, if it's four times, a quadruplet time, it's actually giving information, quadruple time, sorry. It's actually giving information that the more time you spend in carrying out a research, the more reliable your research is going to be. So for people using quantitative research, if you are reporting your your research, if all you report is mean, then there is a problem. Your result might be rejected. It is essential for you to report the mean and standard deviation, or the mean and coefficient of variability. Coefficient of variability is often determined as standard deviation divided by mean multiplied by 100. That is in percentage. Standard deviation does not really have a kind of weighing mechanism, and so, but again, you must not report only the mean, because it will be a threat to your validity. Then another threat to that validity is the nature of the instrument that you use, including questionnaire, and that is why it's often advised that your instrument be subjected to validity test. For people in social sciences, people in sociology, especially human geography, psychology, political science, if you are making use of an instrument, maybe for social survey, maybe questionnaire or any instrument, it is often good for you to test run it. Even in education, you have to test run the instrument. Test run it, whatever your response is will actually give us kind of way to change before you embark on the main testing. So there's necessity for you to report the result of your pilot survey. For people in geography, where you make use of physical instruments, it is essential for you to report the result of your calibration. You have to calibrate your instrument. You have to put the quality assessment level. For example, people using global positioning system, it is essential for you to, number one, to name the model of the instrument you are using, and you put in the accuracy level, maybe plus or minus 5 meters or plus or minus 10 meters, because these ones will actually give us information about how valid your results will be. And so that is actually how, what those things, things we have to consider in those areas. Now let's talk a little bit about our how to come up or how to analyze based on each of the sign that we have used. I think I've been mentioning this and I've been echoing it. If you are using exploratory research method, most of the time you really have to just give information about, you describe your work, and then you might be having some materials from outside, and then you use more of content analysis for exploratory research design. So if you can't say you are doing or you are conducting an exploratory research and then you start telling us that you're going to use inferential statistics, they don't go together. And so they don't go, what goes together is content analysis. If you are using, or if you are adopting descriptive research, I said earlier that you can say you use content analysis, what you will use in social survey, and at the same time, depending on the nature of your data, you can use quantitative data assessment, and then you can decide to use the two, which we call the mixed methods. You can use mixed methods. So, but mixed methods, it's just coming off from the nature of the research design that you are putting on. The research design is is descriptive. It could be longitudinal or it could be cross-sectional. And again, your method can be mixed method. It can be quantification. It can be something you just have to qualify. Then, if you are using experimental, or if you are adopting experimental is actually largely quantitative. Experimental is largely quantitative. It depends on whether you break it down. Well, I mean, how you break it, break it down. If you are working on largely feed experiments, it's going to be quantitative. But in some cases, you might not really get it quantitative because you might need to describe some areas. So in that case, you might decide to use mixed methods. And then I mentioned something again that I think is important. If you are using causal relationship, anytime you mention causal, something comes to your mind, whether one affects the other. So you want to find whether there is relationship, or whether there is relationship, or whether there are contrasts. For relationship, you might want to consider correlation, but the correlation will actually differ again. If your data is essentially a quantitative one, then you consider Pearson correlation. If your data is quasi-quantitative, I mean, a kind of, maybe you are adopting questionnaire, or maybe you are coding some, you might not be able to use Pearson correlation. You might go for Spearman correlation or Kendall correlation. So that shows that whether you are using quantitative data or qualitative data, and then if your focus is on causal, analyzing causality, then you might decide to use correlation. Whether you pick the parametric, which is the one I said, the Pearson correlation, or you pick the one that is non-parametric, which is the Spearman, and then Kendall, we have that. Somehow there is one powerful statistical method that you can use, but again, you must be careful about how you use it, and that is one that look at the difference, and that is analysis of variance. You can decide to use analysis of variance whether you are working on highly quantitative data, ratio data, or you are working on subjective data, like the one you pick from your questionnaire. You might decide to use ANOVA if your intention is for causality, or your intention is for identifying relationship or contrast between two things. Again, ANOVA is actually powerful again because you can actually use it to identify contrast among more than two entities, maybe 3, 4, 5, and all these things. That is important. Then I also want to let us know that somehow for people that, for some people where that are likely going to have multiple independent variables or multiple dependent variables. For example, I gave example of rainfall and a crop yield the other time, and I told you that if you want to get correct answer, it's not only rainfall that affects crop yield, and then you might have lots of information to put in your data. And then if your data is quantitative, if your data is quantitative, then you might want to achieve what we call a kind of parsimony, a brevity. You want to identify those ones that are actually important, that are actually the principal factors in telling your story, in causing a particular pattern. And we say we use what we refer to as principal component analysis, PCA, and then a forerunner to PCA with what we call factor analysis. What factor analysis does is that all your factors, it gives them values, it gives them weight based on some weighing strategy. It actually values them between, or weighs them between -0 and -1 and a +1. And so it actually has been able to group them together. That's what factor analysis does. And so what principal component analysis does is now to bring all these values that it has given, then take the ones that has higher weight, maybe anyone from 0.7 upward. That is what we call distinction. So you can actually say those ones. You might decide to say your own principal is 0.6, so it could be plus or minus 0.6. If it is plus, that indicates a kind of direct influence. If it is negative, that indicates a kind of inverse influence. So their grouping will be different. But what I'm actually saying in essence is that depending on the design that you use, we always have a method that goes for it, and we have a kind of analysis that can work for it. And then I give example of, if your work is essentially exploratory, then we have to start thinking about your choice of method. And like I said, we have lots of methods, but seriously, the main one that I actually use, that I've used, is the one I refer to as the content analysis. And I know they do lots of content analysis in sociology, they do it in anthropology, and then what you use in, I think, political science too. And then demography and social statistics, they actually, but demography and social statistics will actually do either qualitative or quantitative. But the good thing about doing all this one is that for qualitative assessment, you can take photographs, you can take video recording. In content analysis, there is a way you can adopt, you can derive data from all this and bring them together. For people in geography, I know many people want to use geographic information system. Maybe for the benefit of everyone, the essence of geographic information system is to be able to collect data from different sources, data from using different methods, and then bringing all these things together, integrating them together to solving a particular problem. That shows that if the more data you collect, the more the insights you are likely going to get for solving a particular problem. And so the same thing goes everyone. You have more data, and then you have more data and you have more results. Like I said the other time, if you in experiments, if you have triplicates of information or you have multiple of information, you have you have the opportunity of getting valid results. But if you report only mean, Mean tells us that you've only gotten to that feed once, because we are not sure of the mean of what. So you've gotten once, and if you've been to the feed once, there is a chance that what you have gotten from that feed was also a matter of chance. I gave an example. I'd like to give this example that there was a time I was working on some water, and then I found out that the content of certain chemical that I seen in a particular water was actually higher. I didn't know. I thought that was the norm. Until I went there the following time, I discovered that close to that area it's actually an area where they wash clothes. We have a laundry. I think what I suspected that somebody actually poured this leaded water into that area, and that is why I had that result. But if I had gotten that result, I would have actually said that is representative of that area, whereas it is not true. So there is need for us to carry out kind of multiple reaction, multiple investigations. So for me, that is actually what I have to say concerning research design. But as a kind of recap, before I listen to your question, I actually expect that number one, we know what research design is. In the previous class, we mentioned a lot of things about what are expected of us in carrying out some researches, in writing our papers, and then or our thesis. And then we can actually say research design is actually the blueprint. If you have a clear research design, then it's fine. And I said something, and I want to just repeat it, that if you have to give, if somebody that reads your research design has to call you for explanation, then note that that research design, it's not clear enough. And so that is also thing that after writing your research design, it's necessary for you to give it to somebody to read for you. And maybe your supervisor will do that, but again, maybe a friend will read it, somebody that doesn't even understand what you are saying. Maybe you are writing from geography, you can give to somebody in sociology. If that person in sociology can have an idea of what you are saying, yes, then you are doing something. Clarity is important. Completeness is important. Don't assume. Don't let it be until they ask you in exam before you say, okay, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that. No, we don't want to assume. Completeness should be ensured. Clarity should be ensured. Then lastly, credibility is important. We don't want you to use ambiguous word. We don't want you to use ambiguous terms. And then don't forget again, we have different types of research designs. I said we can actually have exploratory research design, and then we have descriptive, and then we have causal. I try to bring it in those three types so that we won't repeat. We have different terms, different names, but again, everything actually focus on those three types. And then when we have exploratory, and I told you the people that use exploratory, and then we have descriptive research that is common to virtually every one of us, and we can use it. But don't forget, when you are using descriptive, it can be longitudinal, it can be cross-sectional. And then we have the experimental research design, and then which I said can be causal experimental. Causal experimental is also part of experimental research design. So, but again, depends on the explanation you have. And then in everything, every one of them have their own characteristics and how they can be used. So for me, that is where I'm going to stop, and then I'm going to ask us to see. Let's see if we have questions. I will listen to our questions, and then we call it a day. Thank you very much.